The first clue is the enormous distance between the name Robin Hood and the exhausted man forced to carry it. One belongs to songs, childhood stories, and the comforting promise that courage can defeat corruption. The other belongs to mud, scars, fading strength, and memories that refuse to become heroic simply because time has passed. Michael Sarnoski's The Death of Robin Hood places those two versions of the same man face to face. The contradiction creates a fascinating question. What happens when a legend survives long enough to confront the truth hidden beneath his own mythology? That question is exactly the kind of compartment we love opening here at the Film Box. Not because destroying a hero is automatically interesting, and not because making a familiar story darker guarantees depth. The real attraction lies in discovering why a culture needs legends in the first place. A story can transform violence into bravery, selfish choices into sacrifice, and a deeply imperfect person into a symbol that strangers are willing to defend. But the person inside that symbol may remember everything differently. Every film is a box. We open it together. This time, the box carries a name almost everyone recognizes. Robin Hood has been portrayed as a charming thief, a joyful rebel, a romantic adventurer, and an uncomplicated defender of ordinary people. You already know the familiar outline, even if you have never read the oldest tales. There is usually a bow, a forest, a band of loyal companions, an unjust ruler, and the reassuring idea of wealth being taken from those who abuse power and returned to those who need it. That version of Robin is keen enough to become timeless. This film is interested in what had to be cleaned away. It asks you to look past the feathered cap, past the cheerful outlaw fantasy, and toward the human cost that a heroic song might deliberately exclude. Its Robin does not enter the story at the beginning of his adventure. He arrives near the end of his strength, carrying the physical and emotional consequences of a life that other people have already converted into folklore. That choice immediately changes the mechanism of the legend. Instead of asking whether Robin can defeat another enemy, the film asks whether he can survive an honest encounter with himself. There is something unsettling about meeting a famous hero after the world has finished idealizing him. His reputation has become larger than his body and more powerful than his own testimony. People may believe they know what he represented, but he knows what he did. That defense becomes our central clue. Watch how the film separates the public story from private memory. Notice when Robin resists the heroic identity attached to him, and notice when other people appear to need that identity more than he does. The name functions almost like a second character, following him through the landscape and demanding that he perform a version of himself he may no longer believe. Yet this is not simply a cynical argument that every hero is secretly fraudulent. That would be easy, and this movie is reaching for something more uncomfortable. A person can fail to match the legend built around him while the legend still creates genuine hope. A violent life can produce consequences that cannot be erased, even if later generations extract a valuable moral from it. The story therefore places redemption and mythology on separate tracks. Becoming useful to history is not necessarily the same as becoming innocent. That distinction gives the film its emotional pressure. You are not being invited to cheer for a polished outlaw performing familiar acts of rebellion. You are being asked to remain beside a damaged man when charm, speed, and youthful certainty are no longer available to protect him. The adventure has already left its marks. What remains is the reckoning, and reckoning moves differently from action. It pauses, it remembers, it forces details that once looked triumphant to return with a different meaning. The title makes no attempt to hide mortality. Death is present before the first image because it is already waiting in the name, but knowing that does not reveal the real destination. The mystery is not merely whether Robin Hood dies. The deeper mystery is what part of Robin must disappear before the man underneath can finally be seen. Is salvation something he can earn? Is it something another person can offer? Or is the desire for a clean ending simply another legend people create because the truth is harder to hold? Keep that gap between reputation and memory in sight. It will lead us through the film's visual texture, its performances, its moments of compassion, and its most difficult choices. It will also help us test whether this revision truly discovers something new inside Robin Hood or merely replaces one simplified image with another. Darkness alone is not honesty. Dirt alone is not realism. The film must prove that its brutality reveals the human truth rather than functioning as decoration. For now, we are standing outside the legend, with the box still closed. We can hear something moving inside it, the heroic song everyone remembers, rubbing against the confession no one wants to hear. Put those two sounds together, and the hook becomes impossible to ignore. This Robin Hood may be celebrated for what the world believes he gave away, but the film's greatest question concerns the one thing he cannot easily surrender control over: the meaning of his own life. The most gripping thing about the death of Robin Hood is not that it removes the shine from a famous hero. It is that the film quietly turns your own desire for his redemption into evidence against you. You know how this kind of story normally works. An aging warrior carries regret. A final journey gives him one last opportunity to prove that the good man was always somewhere inside him. Pain becomes purification. Sacrifice balances the moral account. By the time the music rises, you are allowed to forgive him because the story has done the emotional work on your behalf. This film makes that expectation dangerous. From the moment you see the condition of its Robin, an instinct begins working inside you. You want the damaged body to contain a wounded soul. You want exhaustion to mean wisdom. You want regret to become evidence of goodness. Hugh Jackman's presence strengthens that impulse because he understands how to make physical suffering feel emotionally legible. A moment, a pause, or a moment of silence can invite sympathy before the character has earned it. That is the trap. The film keeps asking whether suffering automatically makes someone worthy of forgiveness. Robin's body may carry punishment, but punishment and accountability are not identical. A scar proves that pain occurred. It does not prove that understanding followed. Age can weaken a violent man without transforming him. Regret can come from conscience, but it can also come from fear, loneliness, or the sudden realization that consequences have finally arrived. This uncertainty creates more tension than a conventional villain ever could. The threat is not simply somewhere beyond Robin waiting with a weapon. It exists within every interpretation of his behavior. When he becomes quiet, is he confronting the past or hiding from it? When he rejects the legend, is that honesty or another way of controlling the narrative? When someone offers him compassion, does he recognize its value, or does he treat kindness as one more resource available to him? The film does not rush to answer those questions. It allows discomfort to accumulate around them. That is especially powerful because Robin Hood is not an obscure figure whose reputation can be rewritten without resistance. He is cultural property. Generations have used him as a symbol of rebellion against injustice. Children learn the moral shape of the legend long before they understand the historical uncertainty surrounding it. Robin exists less as one confirmed person than as a flexible promise. Power can be challenged, wealth can be redistributed, and an outlaw can possess greater moral legitimacy than a ruler. Death of Robin Hood enters that promise and places something unstable at its center. What if the symbol became noble only after storytellers removed the parts that complicated it? What if the people who need Robin Hood to be good are participating in the creation of a useful fiction? And what if usefulness does not make that fiction worthless? Now, the earlier contradiction becomes a mechanism. The film does not merely compare a man with his reputation, it makes reputation behave like a form of absolution. Every heroic story told about Robin threatens to soften the reality he remembers. The legend can protect ordinary people by giving them courage, yet it can also protect Robin from being seen clearly. The same myth may liberate one person and conceal another person's guilt. That is why the title carries such unusual tension. The death being promised may be physical, but the film also places an entire public identity under pressure. If the heroic version disappears, what remains? A criminal, a survivor, a frightened old man, someone still capable of one meaningful choice, or simply a human being whose worst actions cannot be cancelled by the beauty of the story created around him? You may think you already know what a redemption drama will take this. The genre has trained us to recognize the signals: an injured body, a mysterious caretaker, an old relationship returning from the past. a landscape that seems to hold judgment in every patch of fog and stone. These elements usually arrange themselves into a clear moral path. Confession leads to understanding. Understanding leads to sacrifice. Sacrifice produces forgiveness. But this movie's real suspense comes from testing every step in that chain. It wants you close enough to Robin to feel his vulnerability, yet alert enough to question what that vulnerability is doing to your judgment. It wants compassion without moral blindness. It asks you to hold two thoughts at once. A person may deserve care because he is human, and that care does not erase what he has done. That balance is difficult because cinema naturally turns proximity into empathy. Spend enough time with someone's pain and you begin searching for reasons to excuse them. Watch what happens when the film gives you that closeness. Notice which details generate sympathy and which ones interrupt it. Pay attention to the difference between Robin admitting that the legend is false and Robin accepting responsibility for the truth. Those actions may sound similar, but they are not. One destroys an image, the other requires a change within the man. This is the reason the story can grip you even when it slows down. The central battle is taking place inside your response. You are constantly measuring evidence, revising your judgment, and wondering whether your hope for a meaningful final chapter belongs to Robin or to you. The box has not opened yet, but it has already placed you on the evidence board. To understand how deliberately that trap was constructed, we need to step behind the story and examine the people, places, and creative decisions that turned a cheerful folk legend into this severe confrontation with mortality. The trap was not created by beginning with a familiar screenplay formula. It grew from an image that had disturbed Michael Sarnoski since childhood. According to Sarnoski, the first important creative spark came after a canoe trip with his father, when a neighbor named Harvey gave him an old Robin Hood book that had been read decades earlier. Sarnoski expected the adventures associated with the character, but the final chapter confronted him with something completely different. Robin dying a quiet, painfully human death in a sunlit religious chamber. The ordinary scale of that ending refused to match the immortal hero in his imagination. That is our first production fact, but its real value lies in what it explains. This film was not designed by taking a cheerful Robin Hood adventure and covering it with darker colors. It began with a child's confusion about how a legend could die like an ordinary person. The creative mechanism therefore moves backward. Death comes first. The director then asks what kind of life, guilt, and physical decline could make that modest ending feel large enough for the name Robin Hood. This origin also explains why the film is less interested in rebuilding the familiar adventures. Sarnoski is attracted to the gap left after those adventures have become stories. He looks at the final page and imagines everything the heroic versions might have concealed. That produces a different kind of revision. The film is not saying that bows, forests, and rebellion were never part of Robin's life. It is questioning who shaped those elements into a comforting moral identity and what happened to the less flattering evidence. The second key decision was the casting of Hugh Jackman and Jodie at the center of the project, with Bill Skarsgård joining as Little John. Their screen identities create three different forms of tension before the story even asks them to speak. Jackman carries the memory of physically heroic roles, so his worn and diminished appearance feels like a collision with the strength audiences expect from him. Comer can communicate compassion and suspicion almost simultaneously, making kindness feel active rather than naive. Skarsgård brings an unpredictable stillness that prevents loyalty from feeling simple. Jackman is especially important to the clue trail. If Robin had been played by an actor with no heroic associations, the film would only need to introduce an old outlaw. With Jackman, it can quietly work against the protective image you bring into the room. You have seen him play men whose suffering reveals buried goodness. You may therefore begin interpreting this Robin through emotional habits formed by other performances. The casting does not merely fill a role, it recruits your memory and then tests it. Comer's presence operates differently. Her character occupies a position where care could easily become a device used to cleanse the male protagonist. The performance resists that simplification by making attention itself feel intelligent. She does not merely stand beside Robin's pain. She appears to study what the pain reveals and what it fails to prove. That distinction is essential because the film needs compassion without allowing compassion to become a certificate of innocence. The third major fact concerns the physical world. Production took place in Northern Ireland using Belfast Harbour Studios as well as locations including Silent Valley, Glenarm, and Murlough Bay. Those places do more than provide convincing medieval scenery. Their exposed slopes, heavy skies, rough coastline, and deep natural textures remove the decorative romance usually attached to Sherwood Forest. Nature does not seem organized around Robin's legend. It continues around him with complete indifference. This changes the emotional meaning of the landscape. In many Robin Hood adaptations, the forest is a liberated zone. It offers concealment, community humor, and freedom from corrupt authority. Here, the environment feels larger than the person moving through it. The land does not celebrate rebellion. It absorbs footprints, blood, rain, and memory without choosing sides. That visual indifference reduces the legendary outlaw to human scale before the screenplay makes any argument about him. Real locations also give physical behavior more weight. Wet ground changes how a person walks, cold air changes the shape of a breath, uneven stone makes weakness visible because every step demands effort. These details allow the film to communicate age without constantly announcing it. Robin's decline becomes part of his relationship with the terrain. The world he once crossed as an adventurer now seems capable of resisting him at every turn. The fourth verified choice is that the production was photographed on 35mm film, with cinematographer Pat Scola shaping its images. That choice matters because this story is obsessed with the difference between a polished legend and an unstable human memory. Film grain prevents the surface from becoming perfectly clean. Faces, fog, flame, and soil possess texture. The image seems to carry tiny imperfections of its own, as though the medium remembers that everything placed before the lens is temporary. This does not automatically make a film more truthful. Celluloid can romanticize the past just as easily as digital photography. What matters is how Scola and Sarnoski use it. The texture is paired with restrained light and earthy environments, producing images that often feel discovered rather than presented. You sense moisture in fabric and age in stone. The period is not treated like a beautiful exhibit protected behind glass. It feels occupied, uncomfortable, and already decaying. The 35mm format also creates an interesting contradiction around Jackman's face. Cinema has often used the close up to turn performers into icons. Here, the same tool exposes damage, fatigue, and hesitation. The grain gives the face a tactile quality, but it also keeps it slightly beyond perfect inspection. We are brought close to Robin without gaining complete access to him. That visual tension supports the moral uncertainty. Proximity gives us evidence, not certainty. The fifth production detail lies in Jackman's extensive physical transformation. The weathered hair, beard, makeup, and layered costume were not designed to turn him into a majestic elder statesman. They make the heroic body look burdened by time. Jackman has described spending long periods in the makeup process to reach that appearance, and the result does more than establish an age. It changes how every familiar gesture is read. A bow carried by a young Robin represents skill waiting to be demonstrated. The same object near an older, damaged body becomes a reminder of what that skill cost and whether it can still protect him. Broad shoulders no longer communicate invulnerability when the body bends beneath fatigue. Even the recognizable outline of the legendary outlaw seems to be collapsing inward. Makeup and costume therefore participate directly in the story's argument. Myth preserves the silhouette, while life alters the person inside it. There is also a risk in this approach. Aging makeup, severe landscapes, visible grain, and slow physical movement can become prestige drama signals that announce seriousness without creating it. The production must connect every rough texture to character, or the darkness becomes packaging. This is where the casting and the original inspiration have to work together. The childhood image of a quiet death supplies vulnerability. Jackman supplies heroic memory. Comer supplies moral attention. Skarsgård supplies unresolved history. The landscape strips away comfort, and the film stop prevents the past from looking polished. Put those decisions on the same evidence board and the intention becomes clear. Sarnoski is not trying to show you the greatest Robin Hood adventure. He is constructing the emotional aftermath of an adventure that may never have been as noble as the song suggests. Each creative choice removes a layer of protection. The final chapter replaces the triumphant beginning. Age replaces youthful momentum. Natural terrain replaces romantic scenery. And textured photography replaces clean mythology. Now that we understand where this version came from, we can finally open the outer compartment properly. What the film is, who inhabits it, and whether its gleam reimagining offers a meaningful reason to return to one of storytelling's oldest outlaws. The Death of Robin Hood is a 2026 historical drama written and directed by Michael Sarnoski. Hugh Jackman plays the aging outlaw at its center, with Jodie Bill Skarsgård, Murray Bartlett, and Noah Jupe forming the principal ensemble around him. Although the title suggests folklore and adventure, the film behaves more like a slow, severe thriller about mortality. It borrows the clothing of a medieval legend but places a psychological reckoning inside it. That distinction matters before you decide what kind of experience to expect. This is not a lively return to Sherwood Forest, and it is not built around the pleasures traditionally associated with Robin Hood. There is little interest in turning theft into spectacle or rebellion into cheerful entertainment. The familiar icon has been moved beyond his celebrated years into a stage of life where speed is gone, old loyalties have changed, and stories about past glory offer no protection from present weakness. The film exists because the traditional ending contains a strange creative opportunity. Robin Hood is usually imagined in permanent motion. He draws the bow, escapes authority, humiliates the powerful, and disappears into the forest before age can reach him. His legend repeats the adventure rather than allowing the man to move beyond it. Sarnoski takes the old account of Robin's final days and asks what happens when repetition stops. Once the outlaw can no longer perform the actions that made him famous, identity becomes the real conflict. At its heart, this is a story about a person approaching death, while uncertain whether his life deserves the meaning other people have given it. That makes the film less concerned with historical accuracy than moral imagination. Robin Hood has never belonged neatly to one definitive record. He has been reshaped through ballads, books, stage performances, television, and cinema. Each period creates the Robin it needs. Sarnoski's version belongs to an era deeply suspicious of heroic branding, simplified history, and public identities that conceal private damage. The result is ambitious, visually commanding, and occasionally powerful, but also emotionally uneven. Its strongest moments arrive when it trusts faces, silence, and physical vulnerability. Its weaker passages arrive when solemnity begins doing the work that character development should be doing. The movie wants every pause to carry enormous moral weight, yet not every relationship is developed enough to support that pressure. You can admire the construction while still feeling held at a distance from the people inside it. That is the spoiler free verdict. The film has a compelling idea, impressive craft, and committed performances, but its severe tone sometimes narrows the emotional range it needs. It knows exactly how it wants to look and what questions it wants to ask. It is less certain about how deeply the answers should be felt. Jackman remains the clearest reason to enter this version. His performance works against the easy charisma associated with both the actor and the character. He allows Robin to appear physically imposing in one moment and strangely diminished in the next. That instability keeps the role alive. You are never permitted to settle on a single, comfortable reading of the man. Kumar provides a necessary counterweight. Her presence introduces care into a film dominated by damage, but the care never feels soft or decorative. It creates moral pressure because being treated with dignity can force a person to recognize how little dignity he offered others. Skarsgård carries another part of the past into the present, giving old companionship the texture of a wound that never fully closed. Bartlett and Jupe broaden the human consequences around the central figure without turning the film into a conventional Band of Outlaws reunion. Who then is this film for? It is for you if you enjoy patient character studies, morally compromised protagonists, tactile period filmmaking, and stories that dismantle heroic mythology. It rewards attention to expressions, framing, silence, and the tension between what characters say and what their bodies reveal. If you enter wanting action to dominate, a celebratory outlaw adventure, or an emotionally generous crowd pleaser, the film may feel punishingly restrained. Its violence is brief and consequential rather than playful, and its humor offers very little relief from the atmosphere. You should care because Robin Hood is bigger than this particular film. The character represents the way societies transform complicated histories into usable symbols. By placing that transformation under lamination, the movie asks a question that reaches beyond medieval folklore. Can a story inspire justice if the person at its center was not just? Must a symbol be factually clean before it can become morally valuable? And who benefits when a human being is reduced to a simple heroic image? Those questions give the film relevance even when its drama becomes too controlled. The movie is opening more than an old legend. It is examining the emotional bargain we make whenever we inherit a heroic story. We agree to remember certain actions, forget others, and treat the finished version as truth because the symbol gives us something we need. But an idea this heavy can only survive if the opening makes it tangible. The next compartment is therefore not about what the film claims to mean. It is about the immediate sensation of entering its world, meeting this damaged Robin, and realizing within the first 10 minutes that the adventure promised by its name has already become a ghost. The opening does not introduce Robin Hood through an arrow splitting another arrow, a daring robbery, or a crowd celebrating his name. It places an old man in the landscape and allows recognition to become a threat. A young drifter discovers him while he appears vulnerable. The encounter carries the faint outline of a familiar legend, meeting an admirer, but that possibility disappears almost immediately. Suspicion takes control, violence follows, and Robin responds with a severity that destroys any remaining expectation of playful adventure. The moment is deliberately disturbing without feeling designed as a victorious action beat. It does not ask you to admire his reflexes. It asks you to reconsider the moral meaning of the skills that once made him famous. My first reaction was not simply shock. It was the uncomfortable feeling that the film had removed the usual entrance through which sympathy arrives. Most stories about an aging warrior begin by giving us a noble wound. We see the person protecting someone, losing something precious, or suffering because the world no longer recognizes his goodness. Sarnoski refuses that protection. He introduces capability before virtue and survival before conscience. That choice is what hooked me. The scene functions like a piece of evidence placed on the table before the defense can begin. You may later learn about Robin's history, pain, or regret, but the opening will remain in your memory. Any compassion that develops must exist beside what you have already seen. The film cannot easily manipulate you into forgetting because it makes the first impression morally abrasive. This is a risky strategy. If the opening pushes Robin too far away, the later emotional journey may feel like an attempt to rescue a character the film has already made inaccessible. But the risk also creates genuine suspense. The question is no longer whether this famous outlaw can still fight. That answer is provided quickly enough. The more important question is whether the instincts keeping him alive have consumed everything that once made the legend worth believing. The atmosphere around this encounter is cold, damp, and physically resistant. The landscape is beautiful, but it does not offer comfort. There is no romantic golden light inviting you into a mythic forest. Earth and weather dominate the frame. Clothing appears heavy. Movement looks difficult. The environment seems to press against the characters, making everybody feel temporary. This world does not divide itself neatly between noble outlaws and corrupt authorities. It feels inhabited by people who have learned to treat strangers as potential danger. Violence is not presented as a clean exchange between good and evil. It emerges from fear, damaged history, and the need to survive long enough to understand what is happening. That uncertainty gives the first minutes the texture of a hostile frontier rather than a legendary playground. The film's soundscape strengthens that feeling. The natural environment never disappears behind heroic musical instructions. Wind, breath, movement, and the weight of physical contact keep pulling attention back to the body. when music enters. It feels less like a celebration of identity and more like pressure building around it. You are not being told that Robin has returned. You are being warned that something unresolved has followed him. Hugh Jackman's physical performance makes the opening difficult to categorize. He does not play Robin as entirely weak or entirely powerful. The body seems damaged until survival requires sudden force. Then the old skill returns, but it does not restore the hero. It makes him more frightening. That reversal is one of the film's sharpest early ideas. Competence, which usually earns admiration in an action story, becomes evidence of how thoroughly violence has been absorbed into instinct. The face tells a different story from the body. Jackman avoids giving the moment an easy emotional label. He does not invite you to read every action as righteous anger or immediate remorse. Robin seems to operate from a place where threat and response have fused together. The action finishes before reflection can intervene. That suggests a man who has survived for so long by moving faster than conscience. The opening also changes the meaning of the character's famous wealth. The popular legend turns taking into generosity. Robin steals because redistribution makes the crime morally satisfying. This film introduces doubt around that equation. Material evidence no longer supports the clean story people remember. The idea that Robin gave everything to the poor begins to look like another polished compartment of the legend, while the man himself appears connected to possession, secrecy, and control. This does not automatically make the revision profound. Turning a beloved hero into a harsher figure is a familiar modern technique. Sometimes it creates complexity. Sometimes it merely mistakes cruelty for realism. During the first 10 minutes, I could feel both possibilities competing. The craftsmanship commands attention, but the severity is so immediate that it raises a challenge. The rest of the film must answer, will Robin become genuinely complicated? Or will the story simply reverse every noble quality associated with him? That question made it hard to look away, not because the opening promises constant action, but because it creates an argument that cannot remain unfinished. Once the film shows this version of Robin, it becomes responsible for explaining the difference between him and the hero remembered by everyone else. Did history misunderstand him? Did the legend intentionally transform him? Did he change after the events that made him famous? Or was the noble identity always a story created by people who needed hope more than accuracy? The first 10 minutes also established the film's unusual relationship with nostalgia. Familiarity is present, but it is never offered as comfort. Every recognizable element seems to have aged badly. The forest has become hostile. Skill has become reflexive aggression. Secrecy no longer feels exciting. The hero's name carries expectation, but the man reacts to that expectation almost like an accusation. That is where the opening succeeds most clearly. It does not merely announce that this Robin Hood is dark. It uses a specific encounter to change how we interpret the basic tools of his legend. A hidden man is no longer a clever outlaw avoiding authority. He may be someone hiding from consequence. A quick response is no longer charming competence. It may reveal a life organized around suspicion. Wealth is no longer proof of redistribution. It becomes a question waiting to be answered. By the end of this opening movement, the film has built a world where reputation cannot be trusted, mercy cannot be assumed, and physical survival offers no evidence of moral health. It has also made a promise: every familiar symbol will be examined for what it conceals. To see whether the images can sustain that promise, we have to look past atmosphere and examine the machinery itself, the camera's distance, the shape of the light, the rhythm of the cuts, and the visual decisions that turned Robin's body into the first contested object inside the box. The camera treats Robin's body as disputed territory. Patscona's cinematography rarely presents him with the clean, centered authority expected from a legendary hero. Even when Robin occupies the middle of the frame, the surrounding environment seems capable of swallowing him. Rock, trees, mist, and dark interior spaces press against his outline. The composition repeatedly asks whether the man controls the world around him or is merely another damaged object trapped inside it. That visual relationship is crucial. A conventional adventure often makes geography serve the hero. Wide shots reveal the route he will conquer, while close-ups prepare us to admire his decisions. Here, wide frames reduce Robin's importance. The land continues beyond him, older than his reputation and indifferent to his name. Close-ups do not restore control. They expose uncertainty, age, and the effort required to maintain a hard expression. The lensing often places you near the characters without creating emotional comfort. Faces fill the image, yet complete understanding remains unavailable. A shallow field of focus can separate a person from the environment while also making the surrounding world unstable. That softness behind the face resembles incomplete memory. The past is present as pressure, but it rarely arrives as a perfectly organized explanation. This is one reason the film avoids turning its historical setting into visual tourism. It does not constantly open the frame simply to display production value. Locations are seen through character experience. A slope matters because it exhausts the body crossing it. A stone chamber matters because it confines light. A doorway matters because it divides safety from exposure. Space always carries emotional function. The color palette is built around soil, weathered cloth, cold greens, smoke, grey stone, and weak natural light. These colors drain away the bright theatrical identity associated with many Robin Hood adaptations. Green is still present, but it no longer represents youthful freedom. It becomes the color of wrecked vegetation, distance, and a natural world that can conceal danger as easily as it once concealed merry outlaws. Warmer tones are used more carefully. Firelight and sunlit interiors suggest possible shelter, yet the warmth rarely feels permanent. It rests on faces rather than transforming the entire world. This creates a visual argument about mercy. Compassion can reach an individual for a moment, but it cannot magically repaint everything that came before. The warmth is real precisely because it remains fragile. Lighting inside the priory follows that principle. Windows and candles do not flood the rooms with heavenly certainty. Illumination arrives in narrow areas, leaving parts of the frame unresolved. A face may become readable while the surrounding chamber remains dark. The effect is neither complete condemnation nor easy spiritual cleansing. It gives characters enough light to see one another without pretending they can see everything. The production design supports this restraint. Wood, stone, simple bedding, worn tools, and heavy fabric create a world organized around necessity. Nothing appears placed merely to make medieval life picturesque. Objects have weight and history. Surfaces look handled rather than decorated. This matters because Robin's legend is built from symbols, while the film's physical world is built from things that must actually be carried, repaired, cleaned, or endured. Costume design does similar work through silhouette. Robin retains enough of the outlaw shape to remain recognizable, but the materials hang differently on an older body. Layers suggest protection while also making movement heavier. Brigid's clothing establishes discipline and function rather than ornamental purity. Little John's appearance carries the distance between past companionship and present identity. The costumes reveal relationships before the dialogue explains them. Movement within the frame is deliberately uneven. The film can remain still for extended conversations, then allow sudden physical action to break that stillness with uncomfortable force. The contrast prevents violence from becoming background entertainment. Because the camera has taught you to study small movements, a rapid change in posture or direction feels enormous. Action becomes an interruption rather than the film's normal language. Editing follows the same pattern. Andrew Munchin allows pauses to remain after information has been delivered. A cut does not always arrive when a sentence ends. Sometimes the image stays long enough for the emotional defense around a character to weaken. That extra duration encourages you to examine reaction rather than simply collect plot. The face answering a confession may matter more than the confession itself. Yet the pacing does not rely entirely on long takes. During conflict, the cutting becomes more fragmented and bodily. It does not create elegant spatial mastery. Instead, it reduces the encounter to effort, impact, imbalance, and survival. You understand enough to feel consequence, but the choreography is not polished into heroic rhythm. The detonate removes the pleasure of watching a legend perform flawlessly. The 35mm texture binds these elements together. Grain moves across skin, sky, and shadow, preventing any surface from feeling perfectly stable. Highlights bloom gently while darkness retains density. The image seems to breathe, which gives the setting an organic quality digital sharpness might have made too controlled. More importantly, celluloid places visible texture between you and the characters. You're watching history through material, not through a transparent window. Camera movement is used with similar caution. When the frame follows a character, it often feels observational rather than triumphant. There are few movements designed simply to announce scale or importance. The camera seems to search, wait, and adjust. This creates the impression that Robin's identity is not fixed in advance. The film is gathering evidence about him as it proceeds. Framing frequently uses thresholds, walls, branches, and other physical divisions. Characters appear separated even when they occupy the same room. A doorway can turn one person into an observer and another into the subject being judged. Negative space creates the possibility that someone or something from the past might enter. These compositions make relationships feel conditional. Closeness must be negotiated. The visual technique is strongest when it trusts these divisions and weakest when every image strains to appear monumental. Some shots carry such obvious seriousness that they risk becoming illustrations of importance rather than discoveries. But at its best, the film allows meaning to emerge from practical choices. How far the camera stands from Robin, whether light reaches his eyes, how much empty landscape surrounds him, and how long the cut waits before releasing his expression. Put those choices together, and the mechanism becomes visible. The filmmaking does not simply make Robin Hood look older and darker. It removes the visual glamour that once guaranteed his heroism. The landscape refuses to serve him. Warmth does not absolve him. Action does not glorify him. Close ups do not fully explain him. Every technique turns recognition into uncertainty. With the heroic image dismantled at the level of the frame, the story can now test what remains through desire, resistance, choice, and consequence. Robin begins as a man who has removed himself from society without escaping its memory. He lives in the wilderness, carrying wealth that contradicts the generous outlaw remembered in popular stories. The isolation appears chosen, but it is not peaceful. People connected to the damage he caused continue searching for him, turning the landscape into a waiting room for revenge. A young drifter finds him and recognizes the famous name. Her expectation briefly gives the legend a human witness. She has heard about a defender of the poor, yet the person in front of her rejects that identity. He makes it clear that a generous version is a lie and that his past was driven by greed, violence, and appetite rather than justice. This confession sounds honest, but it changes nothing by itself. Robin can describe himself accurately while remaining trapped in the behavior he is describing. When the encounter becomes threatening, he responds with lethal instinct. He survives. The other person does not, and another body becomes part of the hidden evidence surrounding his life. The scene establishes his central want. Robin is not searching for forgiveness, he is searching for an ending powerful enough to match the violent identity he has accepted. He imagines death as one final contest, almost as if a sufficiently brutal defeat could settle the account without requiring him to change. That desire is selfish in a new direction. He no longer wants treasure or reputation, but he still wants control. Little John then returns from the buried world of Robin's past. He is living under another name and has attempted to build a domestic existence around a woman and a young daughter, little Margaret. Yet the old life has followed him into that borrowed stability. A conflict surrounding the farm, the family, and earlier bloodshed has escalated beyond negotiation. John wants Robin's help because the skills that destroyed their old world may still be useful for protecting what remains of his new one. Robin agrees, but not because he suddenly rediscovers loyalty. The confrontation offers exactly what he thinks he wants, a final battle. John sees a dangerous friend who might help save his family. Robin sees a possible exit. Their purposes overlap without becoming morally equal. That difference shapes the violence that follows. They do not ride toward a noble rescue as restored heroes. They enter a conflict already poisoned by retaliation. Each side carries a reason connected to someone previously harmed. By the time weapons appear, the original injury barely matters. because every response has created another death. Robin and John fight with the terrifying efficiency of men who learned long ago to convert fear into action. This sequence confirms that the legend was built around real ability. Robin's reputation as an archer was not invented. John's physical power was not exaggerated. What the songs changed was the moral frame. Skill survives intact, but the idea that it always served the innocent collapses. The battle leaves the farm and family devastated. Little Margaret survives, but the domestic future John tried to create is broken. Robin is also critically injured. The grand ending he imagined seems to have arrived, yet it does not feel complete. There is no admiring crowd, no clean victory, and no moral resolution. Only damaged bodies and a child forced to inherit the consequences. This is the first major reversal. Robin enters the fight, believing death can release him from the burden of reflection. Instead, his injuries make him dependent on other people. He cannot control the final image. He must be carried. John brings Robin and little Margaret to a remote island triary where Sister Brigid cares for the sick, the displaced, and those who have nowhere else to go. Robin enters under the name Randolph. The alias protects him from recognition, but it also creates a strange experiment. For perhaps the first time, someone responds to his vulnerability without responding to his legend. Brigid does not treat him because he is famous, useful, or deserving. She treats the suffering body placed before her. Her care operates according to a moral principle completely foreign to Robin's world. Life does not need to prove its innocence before receiving attention. That idea becomes his new obstacle. Robin understands combat because violence has clear rules. Someone attacks, he responds, and survival determines who controls the next moment. Care is harder because it creates obligation without demanding payment. Brigid's treatment keeps him alive, but survival is exactly what he no longer wanted. Each improvement forces him to remain present with a past he had hoped to escape through death. The priory also changes the scale of his actions. In the wilderness, Robin's history appears as enemies approaching from a distance. On the island, consequence becomes intimate. He sees people living with illness, loss, disability, abandonment, and grief. These experiences are not presented as dramatic punishments arranged around him. They simply exist. The world contains suffering that is not part of his legend, and he is no longer important enough to make every wound about himself. A heavily bandaged resident becomes one of the most significant figures in Robin's recovery. The man's appearance initially encourages distance, but his intelligence and calm gradually undermine Robin's defenses. He offers neither worship nor obvious hatred. Instead, he speaks from an understanding of pain that has not become cruelty. That relationship opens another compartment. Robin has treated injury as permission to injure. The bandaged man demonstrates the opposite possibility. A person can be permanently marked without dedicating the rest of life to retaliation. Forgiveness in this context is not pretending that harm never occurred. It is refusing to let the person who caused it dictate every future choice. Little Margaret creates a different form of pressure. Trauma has made her withdrawn, and Robin cannot approach her through grand speeches. Their connection develops through small acts, food, practical tasks, time spent nearby, and eventually the bow. Teaching her involves the same knowledge that once made Robin dangerous, but the purpose has changed. The skill is no longer being used to enlarge his power. It becomes a way to help a child recover control over her body and attention. This is where the story's clue begins to transform. The name Robin Hood was once attached to generosity whether or not the man practiced it. On the island, Robin performs modest acts of care while hiding the name completely. The legend and the behavior finally move in opposite directions. When the world called him a hero, he was not one. When he begins making less destructive choices, no one knows who he is. The film does not treat this as a complete redemption. Caring for one child cannot balance a lifetime of damage. The relationship matters because it changes the direction of his next decision, not because it erases the previous ones. The cycle of revenge eventually reaches the sanctuary. A young survivor connected to the earlier conflict arrives carrying his own injuries and a desire to make John's family suffer in return. Little Margaret becomes a target because blood debt reduces people to extensions of those who came before them. She is not being judged for anything she chose. She is being treated as a container for someone else's guilt. Robin recognizes the mechanism because he helped build it. His old solution would have been immediate elimination of the threat. That would protect Margaret in the short term while creating another grieving family and another future pursuer. For once, he understands that winning the encounter would preserve the system that destroyed them all. He separates the young man from the sanctuary and confronts him without turning the moment into another execution. Robin explains in his own severe way where revenge leads. It does not restore the dead, it reorganizes the living around the next death. The person seeking justice gradually becomes the image of the person he hates. This is Robin's first meaningful rejection of his old mechanism. He still uses intimidation and the wisdom comes painfully late, but he chooses not to create another body. The decision protects Margaret while also allowing the young survivor to retain a future beyond vengeance. The consequence is internal. Once Robin proves that a different response was possible, he loses the defense that violence was simply his nature. If he can interrupt the cycle now, then he must confront how many earlier moments may also have contained choices. Age has not made him innocent, it has made denial harder. His relationships at the Priory deepen that pressure. Brigid continues caring for Randolph without knowing the history carried inside that name. Margaret begins trusting him without understanding the role he played in creating the violent world that destroyed her family. The bandaged resident knows more than he initially reveals, turning their conversations into quiet tests of whether Robin can accept mercy without using it as another hiding place. The island therefore stops functioning as a refuge. It becomes a moral chamber in which every kindness exposes the lie of the alias. Robin can remain and perhaps do some good, but only by allowing Brigid to care for a fictional person. If he reveals himself, he may destroy the fragile community that has given Margaret safety. If he stays silent, his transformation is built on deception. This is more difficult than battle, because there is no choice without harm. Confession may look noble while transferring pain onto the person forced to hear it. Silence may protect others while also protecting Robin from accountability. The film refuses to make honesty automatically virtuous. It asks what confession is for, the injured person's right to know or the guilty person's desire to feel lighter. The answer becomes unavoidable when Robin discovers that the Priory is connected to his past more directly than he imagined. The care he receives is not floating above history. The people offering him another life carry wounds created by the life he is hiding. Now the opening clue returns in altered form. At first, the gap between Robin's name and his behavior exposed a false hero. At the Priory, the gap between Randolph's behavior and Robin's name threatens to conceal a changing man. The public legend once gave him goodness he did not earn. The private alias now hides the small amount of goodness he has begun to practice. Robin must decide whether transformation has any meaning without truth. He can no longer seek a glorious death, pretend that regret is enough, or accept compassion as though it arrived without history. The box will not open through another fight. It will open when the person who controls stories about himself finally surrenders control over what another human being is allowed to know. And this is the moment the box opens completely. The film's greatest strength is Hugh Jackman's willingness to make Robin difficult to love without making him empty. Jackman could have approached the role as a familiar, wounded hero, using pain to request sympathy from the first frame. Instead, he withholds that request. His Robin is suspicious, impatient, physically dangerous, and often emotionally sealed. The performance gives you no comforting signal that goodness is waiting underneath. When vulnerability appears, it feels like something the character experiences against his will. The scene that proves this most clearly is Robin's confrontation with a young survivor who reaches the island carrying revenge. Jackman begins the exchange with the old physical threat still available. His posture tells us that Robin could solve the problem through force, but the performance gradually shifts. The voice loses some of its aggression, the body becomes less confrontational, and Robin seems to recognize himself inside the young man's anger. Jackman does not turn the moment into a speech from a purified elder. Shame, fear, and authority remain mixed together. Robin is warning someone else while also describing the road he took. That contradiction gives the scene weight. The advice is valuable, but the person offering it is living proof of how late it has arrived. Jodie Comer performs the opposite kind of resistance. Brigid's compassion could easily become passive, but Comer makes it feel like a disciplined choice. She listens without surrendering judgment. Small changes in her expression suggest that she is constantly measuring the distance between the suffering person before her and the incomplete story he has provided. Her strongest work comes when Robin's hidden identity changes the meaning of every earlier interaction. Coma allows several emotions to exist without arranging them into a neat sequence. Recognition, disbelief, rage, grief, and professional instinct collide. Brigid has spent the film using her hands to preserve life. Now, those same hands are near a person connected to her deepest loss. The performance turns that physical proximity into moral suspense. Bill Skarsgård also gives Little John more than rough loyalty. His version of the character carries the desperation of someone who tried to escape one identity by stealing another life, only to discover that the habits of the outlaw remained inside him. Skarsgård makes John's devotion to his family feel genuine without pretending the family was built on an innocent foundation. That combination prevents him from becoming either a simple monster or a sentimental companion from Robin's past. Mari Bartlett's heavily concealed performance works through voice, stillness, and attention. Because much of his face is hidden, he cannot rely on ordinary expressions. He creates warmth through patience. The character listens in a film where most people are preparing to defend, attack, or confess. That quality makes his eventual connection to Robin's history feel emotionally credible rather than merely surprising. Faith Delaney brings essential vulnerability to Little Margaret. Her quietness is not treated as an empty space waiting for adults to explain her feelings. The performance communicates trauma through guarded movement and selective attention. When she begins responding to Robin, the shift is small enough to feel earned. Their bond works because the film allows trust to emerge through repeated actions rather than one dramatic declaration. The story construction also deserves credit for placing the action near the beginning and refusing the obvious climax later. Most films would save the largest confrontation for the final act, allowing Robin to prove his transformation through one more display of violence. Sarnoski recognizes the contradiction in that structure. If the film's argument concerns escaping the identity created by brutality, another triumphant battle would make the argument collapse. Instead, the story moves from external danger toward intimate responsibility. The first part asks whether Robin can survive other people. The second asks whether he can live with himself. The final movement asks whether he can give someone else the power to judge him. Each stage removes one layer of physical control. The famous fighter becomes a patient, the feared outlaw becomes a caretaker, and the man who once shaped his own legend becomes dependent on another person's response to the truth. That architecture is intelligent even when the pacing around it is imperfect. The narrative understands that redemption cannot be demonstrated only through regret. Robin must make choices that cost him something. Sparing a potential enemy costs him the certainty of elimination. Caring for Margaret costs him emotional distance. Revealing himself costs him the protection of the false name. The film measures change through surrendered control. Sarnoski's direction is strongest when he allows visual contrast to carry this progression. The early wilderness feels expansive but emotionally suffocating. The prairie is physically confined yet offers the first possibility of freedom. Open land gives Robin endless routes to escape, while the small room forces him to remain present. That reversal is simple, clear, and effective. The direction of physical action is equally purposeful. The farm conflict is not staged as elegant medieval combat. Bodies slip, tire, and collide. The sequence becomes memorable because competence does not remove chaos. Robin and John may possess extraordinary survival skills, but the environment and the number of opponents prevent those skills from becoming effortless fantasy. Every success seems to create another consequence. Jim Geddy's music strengthens the film by refusing a conventional heroic theme. The score feels rooted in earth, ritual, and unease. Rather than announcing Robin's importance, it often makes his world feel older than his. The music suggests that this individual life is passing through a landscape already filled with stories of violence, faith, loss, and survival. The sound design gives equal value to what would normally remain beneath the score. Wind, water, fabric, breath, footsteps, and interior silence build physical presence. The difference between the exposed wilderness and the controlled quiet of the prairie can be heard before it is intellectually understood. Exterior spaces scatter sound, while small rooms trap it. A breath near a bed can carry more tension than a weapon drawn in the distance. The most unforgettable scene for me is not the largest battle. It is the moment when Robin's identity finally enters the room with Brigid. Nothing about the scene allows an easy emotional escape. Robin's confession may represent honesty, but it also forces Brigid to reopen a grief he was able to avoid for years. Her care has preserved the life of someone she might never have chosen to save had she known the truth. The earlier acts of kindness cannot be withdrawn, yet their meaning has been violently altered. The scene succeeds because both actors resist simplification. Jackman does not present confession as instant moral victory. Comer does not reduce Brigid's reaction to revenge. The room becomes a collision between accountability and mercy, neither of which can exist cleanly. Robin wants the truth to end his hiding. Brigid must decide whether his need for release deserves any place beside her right to anger. That is the film operating at its best. No mythology to hide behind, no action to convert pain into excitement, and no simple moral label capable of organizing the evidence. Just two people facing the fact that compassion can remain real even after the person receiving it becomes unbearable to recognize. The film's finest achievement is making that contradiction visible. It shows that mercy does not require forgetting, accountability does not guarantee repair, and a good final choice cannot rewrite a destructive life. The box opens not to reveal a secret hero, but a human being who finally understands that becoming better and being forgiven are separate outcomes. That clarity makes the film's strongest passages genuinely powerful. It also makes its weaknesses more frustrating. Because the same story that understands moral contradictions so well does not always give its characters enough space to make every emotion land. The film's central weakness is that it sometimes confuses emotional restraint with emotional depth. Silence can be powerful when it surrounds relationships we understand. Here, several long pauses arrive before the connections beneath them have been fully developed. The actors give those moments texture, but the screenplay often asks expression and atmosphere to supply information that the characters have not had enough time to build. You can see that something important is being felt without always feeling it yourself. Brigid suffers most from this problem. Jodie gives her intelligence, restraint, and moral authority. Yet much of the character exists in relation to Robin's journey. We understand her function as healer, witness, and final judge more clearly than we understand her private life before he arrives. When the truth connects Robin to her past, the revelation should reorganize the entire film. Instead, the story moves toward resolution before Brigid has enough space to process what has been taken from her. That matters because forgiveness, mercy, and refusal of revenge are only powerful when the injured person remains a complete human being. If Brigid becomes primarily the instrument through which Robin finds his ending, the film risks repeating the selfish pattern it is trying to criticize. Her pain once again becomes material for his story. Later, John is similarly underused. His attempt to live the outlaw life and construct a family identity contains enough moral conflict for an entire film. He wants to protect people he loves, yet the foundation of his new life is tied to deception and earlier violence. Skarsgård suggests all of that, but the narrative moves quickly through his crisis because it needs to deliver Robin to the Priory. As a result, John's fate creates consequence without achieving its full emotional force. We understand why Margaret is traumatized and why Robin feels responsible for her. But the complicated bond between the two old outlaws could have made that responsibility much richer. More time with John would have clarified whether Robin helps his daughter from genuine care, guilt toward his friend, or the desire to repair a younger version of himself. The tonal structure also creates difficulty. The opening portion behaves like a harsh survival epic while the priory section becomes a slow chamber drama. The contrast is intentional, but the bridge between them is not always smooth. The early violence raises expectations of pursuit and external danger that the film later refuses to satisfy. That refusal makes thematic sense, yet dramatically it can feel as though one movie abruptly hands the story to another. A stronger transition could have allowed the energy of the first half to remain psychologically active in the second. Instead, the priory often feels protected from urgency until the screenplay sends specific consequences there. Robin's past should make every quiet day unstable. At times, however, the stillness becomes simple inactivity rather than tension. The relentless grimness also reduces contrast. Nearly every image, performance, and conversation carries the same heavy pressure. Without more ordinary warmth, humor, or spontaneous human behavior, darkness loses some of its power. A film about discovering the value of life needs to show more of what makes life valuable. Margaret provides moments of tenderness, but even those scenes remain carefully controlled. This does not mean the movie needed jokes or cheerful adventure. It needed emotional weather. Brief lightness would have made the return of grief sharper. A greater sense of community at the Priory would have made the possibility of Robin endangering that community more urgent. The people there sometimes register as symbolic figures arranged around his redemption rather than a living group with routines and desires beyond him. The dialogue can also sound as though characters know they are carrying themes. Several exchanges about violence, forgiveness, and second lives aim for profound simplicity, but the ideas occasionally arrive too neatly. The strongest moments are physical: Brigid treating a wound, Margaret studying Robin, or Hen hesitating at a crucial moment. When the film explains the meaning aloud, it sometimes reduces the ambiguity the images worked hard to create. Finally, the ending compresses several major revelations and decisions. Robin's connection to the bandage resident, his confession to Brigid, Brigid's response, and the final surrender all require emotional adjustment. The film wants the conclusion to feel quiet and inevitably, but inevitability is not the same as sufficient development. Some transitions happen because the theme demands them rather than because the characters have visibly traveled every step. These problems damage the emotional payoff more than the intellectual design. I can trace the film's argument and admire how its pieces connect. Yet I do not always feel the connection with equal strength. The movie creates an impressive evidence board, but several crucial photographs remain too far apart. That is why the flaws are frustrating rather than fatal. The concept remains compelling, the performances remain committed, and the craft remains exceptional. A little more character detail, tonal variation, and breathing room around the finer choices could have transformed a severe, interesting film into a devastating one. The next question is whether other stories about aging warriors and dismantled legends solve this balance more effectively, or whether this film's refusal of emotional comfort is precisely what makes it distinct. The clearest comparison is Robin and Marian from 1976, another film that imagines Robin Hood after youth and legend have begun separating from the man. Sean Connery's Robin returns older but still emotionally attached to the adventure. The film allows romance, humor, disappointment, and tenderness to coexist, giving age a wider emotional range. The death of Robin Hood is harsher. Its Robin is not simply an idealist who has outlived his best years. He questions whether the idealism ever belonged to him. That makes Sarnoski's concept more radical, but Robin and Marian creates a richer sense of shared history. Connery and Audrey Hepburn make the years between their characters feel inhabited. Jackman and Coma produce intense individual moments, yet the relationship has less time to develop before it must carry the ending. If Sarnoski's film had borrowed anything from Robin and Marian, it should have been that patience with emotional memory. The older film understands that aging is not only physical decline. It is the accumulation of jokes, arguments, disappointments, habits, and tenderness. The newer film sometimes reduces age to guilt and bodily damage. The Green Knight offers the closest visual and spiritual comparison. Both films use medieval landscapes to examine mortality rather than celebrate conquest. Both place a familiar figure inside a journey where the meaning of courage becomes unstable. Dev Patel's Gawain initially wants the reputation of a hero without having lived heroically. Jackman's Robin has the reputation already and wants to escape what it conceals. That creates a beautiful inverse relationship. Gawain must decide whether to accept consequence before becoming worthy of a story. Robin must accept consequence after the story has made him worthy without permission. The Green Knight handles ambiguity more confidently. Its symbols remain open without feeling incomplete, and its dreamlike structure allows uncertainty to become part of the experience. The death of Robin Hood explains more of his moral argument while developing some relationships less fully. Sarnoski's film is more direct about the human cost of violence. The Green Knight treats death as an existential horizon. Robin Hood treats it as a debt passed between families. One asks whether a person can finally act with honor. The other asks whether one honorable decision can matter when it arrives after countless destructive ones. Logan is the most unavoidable comparison because Hugh Jackman again plays an aging, violent icon whose body is failing as he becomes responsible for a younger person. Both films remove the character from the triumphant version associated with popular culture. Skill has become painful. Immortality has become exhaustion. Care for a child creates the possibility of one final movement away from isolation. Logan is more emotionally effective because the relationship at its center receives greater narrative space. Laura challenges Logan, depends on him, resists him, and gradually changes what he believes he can still give. Little Margaret's bond with Robin is gentler and more symbolic. It supports the theme, but it does not develop to the same variety of conflict. The death of Robin Hood makes the harder moral choice. Logan's past is violent, but the film still protects his essential heroism. Robin is not offered that protection. Caring for Margaret does not reveal that he was good all along. It proves only that he is capable of doing something better now. That refusal to rewrite his past distinguishes the film from most finer chapter stories. The Irishman provides the strongest comparison in structure and moral temperature. Martin Scorsese follows a criminal into old age and strips violence of the excitement that once justified an entire genre. Frank Sheeran survives long enough to discover that survival can be the punishment. His stories remain, but the people who might have cared about them are gone. Sarnoski pursues a similar destination through folklore. Both films deny the protagonist a glorious final battle. Both understand that an aging violent man may desire a dramatic death because drama would preserve his sense of importance. The difference is emotional precision. The Irishman builds regret through decades of choices and relationships, allowing the final loneliness to feel inevitable. The death of Robin Hood compresses its moral history into revelations, which makes its conclusion intellectually clear but less devastating. What does Sarnoski's film do that these others do not? It places myth itself between the guilty person and accountability. Robin is not only hiding from what he did, he is being protected by a cultural story that insists he represented justice. That gives the film a distinctive argument about how legends can perform moral laundering while still inspiring genuine good. If you loved The Death of Robin Hood for its medieval atmosphere and spiritual uncertainty, watch The Green Knight next. If the aging outlaw idea interested you but you wanted more tenderness and emotional history, choose Robin and Marian. If Jackman's physical vulnerability and relationship with the child were the strongest elements, Logan offers the fuller version of that dynamic. If you wanted a more patient, devastating study of violence becoming empty in old age, The Irishman is the strongest alternative. Placed beside those films, The Death of Robin Hood looks neither unnecessary nor definitive. It has a valuable angle and exceptional craft, but its emotional completion prevents it from fully matching its ambition. What makes it worth discussing is not that it tells the best story about an aging hero. It asks the most uncomfortable question about who benefits when a violent man is remembered as one. That question becomes even sharper when we consider the cultural moment into which the film arrived. The Death of Robin Hood arrived in June 2026. during a summer dominated by familiar properties, large-scale spectacle, and movies designed to provide immediate recognition. That made Robin Hood a commercially understandable choice. The name requires no introduction, but the film uses that recognition to deliver almost the opposite of what a broad summer audience might expect. It opened in the United States on the same weekend as Toy Story 5, a film built around affectionate familiarity and enormous family appeal. Sarnoski's movie offered an aging folk hero, severe violence, slow reflection, and very little nostalgia. The contrast could hardly have been sharper. One release asked whether beloved characters can remain full as their world changes. The other asked whether a beloved character was ever worthy of the meaning attached to him. That placement helps explain the film's difficult theatrical life. By late July 2026, reported worldwide ticket sales were just under $7 million, with roughly 5.3 million coming from North America. Those numbers do not measure artistic value, but they reveal a mismatch between recognizable branding and the experience being sold. Robin Hood may be famous, yet this version deliberately rejects the qualities that made the name commercially reassuring. The film also entered a culture exhausted by both heroic worship and automatic deconstruction. You can feel why storytellers want to revisit old icons. Public conversations increasingly examine how nations, industries, and communities convert complicated people into simple symbols. Audiences have become more alert to the missing voices beneath heroic history. A film about a celebrated outlaw whose reputation conceals victims therefore feels unmistakably contemporary. At the same time, that revision is no longer surprising by itself. Modern cinema has repeatedly shown older heroes as damaged, violent, morally compromised, or abandoned by the world that once celebrated them. The audience now recognizes the machinery. Remove the colorful costume, add mud, scars, regret, and severe lighting. Reveal that the legend was incomplete. The death of Robin Hood must therefore prove that its darkness produces insight rather than simply announce maturity. The economic meaning of Robin Hood makes this choice even more provocative. The gap between extreme wealth and ordinary survival remains a major political anxiety. A traditional version of the character could have arrived as a satisfying fantasy of redistribution, a figure who takes power from those hoarding it and returns resources to people being crushed below. Sarnoski refuses that opportunity. His Robin keeps what he takes, while later storytellers convert selfish crime into social justice. That reversal can feel bracing because it asks how easily political symbols become detached from historical behavior. It can also feel disappointing because the film removes a rare popular image of resistance without replacing it with a meaningful collective alternative. The story becomes intensely personal at a moment when the legend's social dimension might have carried enormous relevance. Critical reception reflected this tension. As of late July, Rotten Tomatoes showed roughly two-thirds of critics responding positively, while its verified audience scores sat closer to the mid-50s. Metacritic placed professional reviews at 60 out of 100, with its smaller group of user ratings averaging around 5 out of 10. The pattern is revealing. Critics were divided but often admired the ambition and craft, while general audiences were slightly less persuaded by the pacing, tonal severity, and rejection of familiar Robin Hood pleasures. Positive reactions focused on Jackman's committed performance, Scola's cinematography, the physical reality of the setting, and the bold refusal to deliver a conventional heroic farewell. These responses treated the slow second half as the point. For them, denying a final action climax was a meaningful critique of the character's desire to die dramatically. Negative reactions identified nearly the same qualities but interpreted them differently. The bleakness felt oppressive rather than honest. The shift toward the priory felt uneventful rather than meditative. The absence of a triumphant ending felt less like thematic discipline and more like withheld payoff. This is one of those films where disagreement is not primarily about what the movie does, it is about whether the intended discomfort becomes emotionally rewarding. The divide between critics and audiences was therefore smaller than the divide inside each group. Some viewers considered the film brave and reflective. Others saw it as a joyless misuse of a beloved figure. Some critics praised its refusal of spectacle. Others argued that it replaced excitement with underdeveloped seriousness. The movie did not create one clean critical camp and one clean audience camp. It created a shared argument about how much emotional access a film owes you when alienation is part of its design. Awards history cannot yet offer a final judgment. The film was only released in June, so the major 2026-27 award cycle had not developed by late July. It had not accumulated a meaningful list of major wins or nominations at that point. Any prediction should remain a prediction. If recognition arrives, the strongest cases are Jackman's physical and emotional transformation, the cinematography, makeup and hair work, production design, and sound. Comer also deserves attention for creating a complete moral presence from material that does not always give Brigid sufficient depth. Whether those achievements remain visible through a crowded award season will depend on campaigning and whether the film's modest theatrical performance limits its momentum. Its longer life may be more interesting than its opening. A dark, demanding film can struggle when marketed through the name of a famous adventure hero and perform differently once people approach it as a chamber drama. Home viewing may allow its intended audience to find it without the same expectation of summer spectacle. However, as of late July, that second wave discovery was only beginning, so declaring a cult reputation would be premature. The film possesses qualities that often grow through reconsideration. Its images are memorable. Its central argument becomes clearer after the ending. Its refusal of a conventional climax may feel less frustrating once you know it is deliberate, but the underdeveloped relationships will not automatically become richer with time. A later reputation may improve, yet the structural limitations will remain. Does it feel timeless or perfectly of its era? Its concern with death, guilt, mercy, and the stories people leave behind is timeless. Human beings have always cleaned the past into legends because complexity is difficult to carry. Yet, the film's method is distinctly contemporary. It distrusts blending, questions inherited heroes, foregrounds victims, and treats redemption as something that cannot be claimed by the guilty person alone. That combination may become its most lasting cultural value. The film does not restore Robin Hood for a new generation. It records a moment when culture no longer trusted restoration without interrogation. The remaining question is how far that interrogation can be pushed before interpretation becomes invention, especially when audiences begin filling the film's deliberate silences with theories of their own. The ending has produced several competing interpretations, and the strongest debate concerns Brigid's role in Robin's death. One reading argues that Brigid ultimately takes revenge. Robin reveals that he is responsible for the loss that shaped her life, and the healer then performs the same bloodletting procedure associated with his death in the old ballad. From this perspective, the Priory never becomes a place of salvation. It becomes the final destination of a consequence that has been waiting for him. The film supports part of that theory. Brigid's anger is real, and the physical method connects Robin's past directly to his fate, yet describing the scene as simple revenge ignores Robin's participation. He has spent the story searching for the right death, and by this point, he no longer wants the grand battle he imagined. He asks Brigid to continue when she hesitates. The ending therefore operates somewhere between judgment, mercy, and assisted surrender. Brigid does not become a conventional executioner. She is placed in an impossible position created by Robin's confession. Saving him may continue the danger surrounding the Priory. Allowing him to die may satisfy anger while violating the identity she built as a healer. The film refuses to separate those motives cleanly. The strongest interpretation is not that she forgives him or takes revenge. It is that she accepts his final choice without pretending the choice repairs what he did. A second theory treats the island priory as a form of purgatory. Robin arrives critically injured, assumes another name, and enters a confined place populated by people carrying wounds connected to his moral condition. The world slows. External pursuit loses importance. Figures from his past appear in altered forms. Every relationship forces him toward confession. The imagery strongly supports the purgatorial reading as metaphor. The island exists between open wilderness and final death. Water separates it from the violent world Robin knew. Brigid performs both physical healing and moral examination. The bandit resident behaves like a witness who understands the complete history while waiting for Robin to understand it himself. What does not hold up is the literal version of the theory, the idea that Robin already died during the farm battle and everything at the priory is supernatural judgment. The film provides no reliable evidence that the island is outside reality. Other characters have independent histories, practical responsibilities, and physical needs. The changing atmosphere represents Robin's altered condition, not a secret afterlife twist. A third interpretation asks whether the bandaged man arranges Robin's final confession as a delayed act of vengeance. His hidden identity connects him directly to Robin's earlier brutality. He understands what revealing the truth to Brigid will do, and his advice sends Robin toward the room where death eventually arrives. On the surface, this can look like an elegant revenge plan carried out without a weapon. The problem is that his behavior does not resemble someone trying to continue a blood debt. He has lived beside Brigid and knows the cost revenge could impose on her. His conversations with Robin emphasize the possibility of another life rather than the satisfaction of punishment. He does not force the confession or control Brigid's response. He removes the protection of ignorance and leaves both people free to choose. The better reading is that he gives Robin an accountability test. Robin has begun acting differently, but the change remains protected by the name Randolph. If he stays silent, he can enjoy peace purchased through deception. Revealing himself risks everything. The bandaged man's intervention asks whether Robin wants transformation or merely comfort. A fourth theory suggests that little Margaret becomes the next Robin Hood. Robin teaches her archery, gives her a bow, and allows her to release the final arrow associated with his legend. The image can look like a direct passing of the mantle. One Robin dies, another begins. The field supports inheritance but not necessarily replacement. Margaret has already suffered because adults treated children as extensions of family violence. Turning her into the next outlaw would continue the exact pattern Robin finally rejects. The bow cannot mean only combat. Under his guidance, it becomes concentration, trust, skill, and release. When Margaret sends the arrow beyond the window, she performs the final legendary act that Robin cannot perform himself. This transfers authorship. The closing image of Robin Hood will no longer belong entirely to the violent man in the bed. A child he protected participates in shaping how his story ends. She does not inherit his crimes. She inherits the ability to choose what the symbol becomes next. Another weaker interpretation claims that Robin's account of himself is as unreliable as the heroic legend. Perhaps he exaggerates his cruelty because self-hatred has consumed him, while the truth lies somewhere between criminal and champion. The idea sounds appealing because the film constantly questions stories, but the evidence does not support a hidden noble Robin. Survivors identify specific harm. Later, John's history confirms the destructive pattern, and Robin's instincts reveal how deeply violence shaped him. The film may leave room for isolated acts of courage in his past, but it does not secretly restore the familiar hero. Its point is more difficult. A useful legend can grow from an unworthy person, and an unworthy person can still make a meaningful choice without becoming innocent. Put the strongest theories together, and the final arrow gains a new function. Brigid controls whether Robin's body continues. The bandaged witness controls whether his identity remains hidden. Margaret controls the last visible action attached to his name. Robin's final transformation is therefore not becoming heroic, it is surrendering the power to determine his own meaning. That interpretation leads directly beneath plot and theory, into the human fear the entire film has been circling. What happens when you cannot change what you did, but you are still alive long enough to choose what you do next? Beneath the medieval setting, the death of Robin Hood is really about the difference between changing and being cleared of responsibility. Stories often merge those outcomes. A character admits wrongdoing, performs one selfless act, and receives emotional release. The transformation becomes a form of payment. Once the debt is paid, the story permits everyone, including the harmed people, to move forward. This film resists that comfort. Robin can become less violent without becoming innocent. He can care for Margaret without restoring the children harmed by his earlier life. He can stop Godwin from pursuing revenge without changing the fact that Godwin's anger began with real loss. He can tell Brigid the truth without giving her back what the truth explains. That is a painful but human idea. Most of us want improvement to repair the past because otherwise change can feel too small. If nothing can undo the harm, why become different now? The film's answer is that change matters not because it erases today, but because it alters who will be harmed tomorrow. Robin's greatest moral act is not balancing the account. The account cannot be balanced. It is preventing the account from growing. Names become the first recurring symbol of this conflict. Robin Hood is the public name polished into generosity and resistance. Randolph is the private shelter, allowing a dangerous man to receive care without history entering the room. Neither name contains the complete person. One hides his guilt behind fame, the other hides it behind anonymity. The film suggests that identity becomes dangerous when a name starts controlling which evidence people are allowed to see. Robin Hood receives admiration because the legend edits the man. Randolph receives compassion because the alias edits him again. The edits move in opposite directions, but both deny other people the information required to make a free judgment. Confession therefore matters because it returns choice to Brigid. Robin cannot demand forgiveness, but he can stop controlling the conditions under which he offers care. Truth is not presented as self-purification. It is the surrender of narrative power. The bow carries a related meaning. At first, it represents mastered violence. Robin can release an arrow with such speed and precision that distance no longer protects another person. The weapon extends his control beyond the reach of his hands. His legend then cleans their control by attaching it to justice. When he teaches Margaret, the bow changes function. The important act is no longer striking a target. It is learning how to hold tension without being controlled by it. An archer must pull backward before the arrow can move forward. That physical pattern mirrors the story. Robin cannot move toward a different ending until the past is drawn close enough to feel. The arrow is also irreversible. Once released, it cannot be called back. You can regret the decision while it travels, but regret does not change its direction. Robin's life is filled with actions that have already left the string. The film's moral question is not how he can retrieve them, it is whether he can stop firing. Blood carries the history of those irreversible choices. During combat, blood represents consequence imposed on others. At the Priory, blood becomes something drawn from Robin's own body under another person's control. The shift changes him from agent to patient. He has spent a lifetime deciding whose body should be. Now his body becomes a site where judgment, healing, and death meet. Blood also connects families through vengeance. A person is targeted not for an individual choice but because they carry a relationship to someone else. Little Margaret and Godwin inherit debts created before they had power over the conflict. This is how violence survives the people who begin it. Memory travels through family, and grief mistakes repetition for loyalty. Robin interrupts that cycle when he recognizes that inherited pain does not have to become inherited behavior. The film is not asking Godwin to forget, it is asking whether honoring the dead requires creating more people who must be mourned. The island symbolizes the distance needed to ask that question. Water separates the priory from the world of pursuit, but it cannot erase what crosses into it. Robin, Margaret, Brigid, and the bandaged resident all arrive carrying histories. The sanctuary protects them from immediate danger while giving those histories room to become visible. This makes the island less a place of escape than a place without distraction. Robin can no longer keep moving from one thread to another. Stillness removes the excuse of survival. Once no one is attacking him, he must discover whether violence was only a response to danger or the identity through which he understood everything. Hans repeats throughout the discovery. Robin's hands know how to draw, strike, take, and bury. Brigid's hands clean, cut, hold, and heal. Margaret's hands learn to handle the bow. The same physical capacity can protect, injure, or create, depending on the intention directing it. That symbol keeps the film grounded. Goodness and violence do not belong to separate species of people. They emerge through actions performed by human bodies. Robin is not transformed into someone incapable of harm. He becomes someone who understands that capacity and makes one different choice. The bandaged man deepens this idea. His body carries visible evidence of the past, yet his life is not organized around returning the injury. The bandages conceal identity without concealing consequence. He represents what Robin has never understood. Surviving harm does not require becoming a monument to the person who caused it. His forgiveness is often mistaken for Robin's absolution. It is not. Forgiveness belongs to the person offering it. It may free that person from being governed by hatred, but it does not certify the guilty person as good. Brigid is allowed a different response because suffering does not create a moral obligation to forgive in the same way. That distinction may be the deepest layer in the box. Redemption is often treated as something the guilty person earns from others. The film reframes it as a direction of behavior, not a prize. Robin can move toward less harm. Other people remain free to love him, hate him, forgive him, judge him, or refuse him. This connects to ordinary life more than the medieval setting might suggest. Many people eventually confront a version of themselves they no longer want to be. The change may come after a broken relationship, a betrayal, a neglected responsibility, or years spent hiding behind a reputation. There is always a temptation to believe that feeling guilty proves transformation. It does not. Guilt looks backward. Change becomes visible in what happens next. The death of Robin Hood does not offer the fantasy that one beautiful ending can clean an ugly history. It offers a smaller and more demanding hope. Even when repair is incomplete, the next choice still belongs to you. Before we decide what this film may leave behind, we need to examine how its own reputation fits into the much older life of Robin Hood, a legend that has survived precisely because every generation fires the name in a different direction. It is too early to claim that the death of Robin Hood has changed cinema. The film was released only weeks ago, and influence requires more than resemblance, discussion, or admiration. No later movie can yet be reliably connected to choices made here. Any declaration of lasting impact would be prediction disguised as history. What can already be measured is the film's position inside the much older screen life of Robin Hood. Cinema has repeatedly rebuilt the outlaw according to the values of the moment. Earlier popular versions emphasized adventure, romance, athletic confidence, and opposition to corrupt authority. Later interpretations added historical texture, political seriousness, or battlefield realism. Even when the tone became darker, the central moral identity usually survived. Robin might be flawed, but he remained recognizably aligned with justice. Sarnoski breaks that agreement. His film does not ask how a good rebel became a legend. It asks whether a legend created the goodness after the fact. That reversal makes this one of the most serious screen interpretations of the character, not because it contains harsher violence, but because it removes the moral guarantee beneath the familiar actions. The film's most important contribution may be its return to the death tradition rather than the adventure tradition. Many adaptations draw from the accumulated popular package: Sherwood Forest, The Sheriff Marian, The Merry Men, archery contests, royal politics, and redistribution. The death of Robin Hood reaches toward the old ballad concerned with illness, bloodletting, betrayal, and a final arrow. That choice reminds us that folklore is not one fixed source. It is a collection of versions that disagree, disappear, and change through retelling. The cheerful outlaw is not the only authentic Robin simply because cinema repeated him most often. Sarnoski does not destroy a single original, he selects neglected fragments and builds a modern moral argument around them. Robin and Marian previously used the aging hero and his death to challenge the permanent youth of the legend. Sarnoski pushes further by removing romance as the emotional center. His Robin does not return to a great love who remembers the man beneath the myth. He reaches the end among people harmed by the kind of life the myth concealed. That changes death from tragic farewell into unresolved accountability. Within Hugh Jackman's career, the film also extends a pattern of examining what remains after the powerful body becomes unreliable. The casting inevitably invites memories of Logan, but Robin is denied the moral foundation that made Logan's final sacrifice cathartic. If the performance endures, it may be remembered as one of Jackman's most uncompromising attempts to separate physical charisma from heroism. The film may influence future folklore adaptations if filmmakers respond to its willingness to abandon the most commercially recognizable parts of a property. It proves that an established name can be used for a small, difficult chamber drama rather than a franchise launch. Whether studios interpret the modest box office as artistic courage or commercial warning remains uncertain. That uncertainty matters. Influence does not always mean imitation. A film can shape the industry by encouraging one approach, but it can also become evidence executives use to avoid similar risks. If the death of Robin Hood develops a stronger reputation through home viewing, it may support more adult, formally ambitious reinterpretations. If it disappears after its theatrical run, its lesson may be reduced to the difficulty of selling a famous hero without the pleasures attached to him. Its early reputation is still unstable. Some responses treat it as a bold meditation misunderstood by audiences expecting action. Others see impressive filmmaking attached to a thin, punishing story. Those positions are unlikely to merge quickly because the disagreement concerns the film's basic method. The same slowness is either discipline or emptiness. The same grimness is either honesty or monotony. Time may help the movie in one important way. Future viewers will be less controlled by its initial marketing and release context. They may approach it knowing that the action is concentrated early and the real destination is quiet. That knowledge could make the structure feel purposeful rather than misleading. Time may not solve every problem. Brigid will remain underdeveloped. Little John's section will still feel compressed. Severe emotional turns will continue arriving faster than the performances deserve. A cult following can change how flaws are valued, but it cannot make missing scenes appear. What does it mean for film history that this movie exists? It means the Robin Hood symbol remains flexible enough to survive even a film that attacks its moral foundation. A weaker cultural figure would break under that pressure. Robin does not. The audience can reject this version and still return to the outlaw they prefer. That freedom is the strength of folklore. No single adaptation knows the final meaning. The film also preserves an unusual ending on a large cinematic scale, a famous action figure discovering that a grand death would only repeat the fantasy that protected him. The final battle is rejected. The hero's body becomes quiet. Another person releases the arrow. If future films remember anything from Sarnoski's approach, I hope it is not simply the mud grey palette, aging makeup, or severe violence. Those surfaces are easy to copy. The more valuable inheritance is the structural courage to ask whether a character's expected climax would betray the story's deeper argument. Data for Robin Hood has not yet earned the word influential. It has earned a place in the conversation of flawed, beautifully constructed, morally abrasive interpretation that refuses to let one of cinema's most familiar outlaws die in the pose that made him famous. Now only the decisive evidence remains, the revelations, the final bloodletting, the arrow, and the exact meaning of the quiet death promised from the beginning. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now. Go watch it and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'd want to experience it fresh. The ending only works when the opening is treated as evidence rather than shock. Robin is first discovered by Wainwright, a desperate young traveler who knows the heroic stories attached to his name. Robin rejects those stories, describing himself as a criminal who kept what he stole. When she attempts to claim the bounty on him, he responds with practiced brutality and adds her to the many people already buried near his isolated camp. Those graves are the earliest image of the film's real structure. Robin believes he is hiding from society, but the past keeps walking toward him in human form. Every person who searches for him carries a relationship to someone he harmed. Killing another pursuer creates another grave and another reason for someone else to come. Little John, now calling himself Edward, offers Robin the final battle he believes he wants. John's attempt to build a family life has collapsed under the weight of violence and deception. He asks Robin to help him reclaim what remains, and Robin agrees because the conflict appears capable of delivering a dramatic death. The resulting attack destroys the last romantic possibility around the two outlaws. Their famous abilities are real, but the moral story attached to those abilities is not. Death in Margaret survives while Robin receives injuries that should end his life. Yet death refuses to arrive in the heroic form he imagined. That is the first decisive twist. The battle is not the climax. It is the mechanism that removes Robin's control. He is taken to the island priory under the false name Randolph. Brigid treats him without knowing who he is, and Robin experiences a form of care unrelated to reputation. The legendary name once gave him goodness he had not earned. The alias now gives him safety based on information Brigid does not possess. Little John's death leaves Margaret without her parents, and Robin gradually assumes responsibility for her. He makes her a bow, teaches her through patient actions, and helps her regain some control after trauma. The film does not present this as repayment. One protected child cannot cancel the others harmed by his choices. Margaret matters because caring for her changes what Robin does when vengeance arises again. The injured young man calling himself Arthur is actually Godwin, a survivor connected to the farm conflict. He has come to continue the blood debt by targeting little Margaret. Robin recognizes the pattern immediately. Margaret is about to be punished for her father, just as Godwin believes he must act for his own family. The old Robin would remove the threat permanently. Instead, he takes Godwin away from the sanctuary and persuades him to abandon revenge. Robin uses his own ruined life as evidence of where that road ends. Godwin lives alive and Margaret remains safe without another family receiving a new reason to retaliate. This is the film's clearest proof of change. Robin does not merely feel sorry. He interrupts a mechanism he previously strengthened. Then the bandaged resident reveals himself as Guy of Gisborne, someone Robin once faced and permanently harmed. The concealment was not protecting Robin. It was allowing Guy to decide when the past should become visible. Guy has lived with the bodily evidence of their encounter. Yet he has not shaped his remaining life around revenge. His forgiveness does not clear Robin's account. It demonstrates that a victim can refuse retaliation without denying the injury. Guy then pushes Robin toward the truth he has continued hiding from Brigid. That choice leads to the film's most important reveal. Robin admits his real identity, knowing that he is connected to the death of Brigid's husband. Every earlier act of care changes meaning in an instant. Brigid preserved the life of the man responsible for the loss that redirected her own life. The film now recreates the old ballad in morally altered form. The prioress bloodletting, the quiet room, and the dying outlaw are all present. But Brigid is not simply a treacherous religious figure, and Robin is not an innocent hero betrayed by someone he trusted. Both understand what is happening, even if neither can reduce it to a single clean motive. Brigid's anger is justified. Her instinct as a healer still resists taking a life. Robin recognizes that hesitation and asks her not to save him again. This is not presented as a practical solution to suffering or a model to imitate. Within the story, it is the final consequence of a man who has spent his life converting other bodies into the price of his choices. Robin briefly encountered Little John within a dreamlike moment, and the imagined reunion confirms that he has stopped waiting for a spectacular ending. He is ready to finish quietly. The violent death he once desired would have preserved the identity of the legendary fighter. The bed denies him that performance. Margaret enters before the end. Robin protects her from the full reality of what is happening and speaks to her about her father. This act matters because he does not use John's story to recruit her into revenge. It gives her a memory capable of existing without another enemy. The final arrow completes the clue trail. Robin has used arrows to control life at a distance. His accuracy turned intention into irreversible consequence. In the final scene, however, Margaret holds the bow. Robin no longer aims, chooses the target, or determines where the arrow lands. She releases it through the window while Robin dies in the bed. The image draws from the legendary account in which Robin's final arrow determines his resting place, but the film changes the archer. The man cannot perform his own myth. A child completes it for him. That transfer separates the future of the symbol from the violence of the person. The arrow does not prove that Margaret becomes another outlaw. It represents the release of inherited weight. She has been trapped inside debts created by adults. Robin's last gift is not the weapon itself, it is permission for her life to travel beyond those debts. Several details foreshadow this resolution. The title reveals death but hides its form. Robin's early search for a worthy opponent exposes it that death must confirm importance. Brigid's healing practice places preservation and danger in the same hands. Guy's bandages establish that identity can be concealed while consequence remains visible. The glaives near Robin's camp show that violence reproduces itself. Margaret's silence demonstrates how children absorb conflicts they did not begin. Even the movement from wilderness to bedroom carries meaning. Robin begins surrounded by open land, but trapped inside repetition. He ends within a confined room after finally releasing the need to control his story. Physical space becomes smaller as his moral awareness expands. There is no post-credit scene reopening the story or suggesting another adventure. The absence is appropriate. A sequel tease would weaken the finality. The last arrow leaves the frame, and the film allows its direction to remain beyond Robin's knowledge. My reaction to the ending is divided in a way that matches the film itself. Intellectually, it is beautifully designed, the clues connect, the violent beginning and quiet conclusion form a meaningful contrast. Replacing the expected battle with an intimate surrender is the correct structural choice. Emotionally, the scene does not reach its complete potential because Brigid's inner life has received too little space. Her decision carries enormous ethical and personal weight, yet the story remains centered on what her response means for Robin. More time with her grief could have made the ending devastating instead of merely solemn. Still, the final reveal completes the film's argument with unusual honesty. Robin does not discover that he was secretly heroic. Brigid does not declare the debt erased. Margaret does not restore the cheerful legend. The ending offers no perfect balance. What it offers is an interruption. The man who spent his life directing violence outward finally stops. The woman he harmed retains the power to respond without being reduced to his instrument. The child inherits a bow without being ordered to inherit the war. The arrow continues, but the blood debt does not have to follow it. That is the final reveal hidden inside the opening clue. The gap between Robin Hood and the man carrying the name never closes. Instead, control over the name passes beyond him. He cannot repair the story of his life, but he can stop forcing everyone else to remain inside it. The Death of Robin Hood is a film I admire more than I emotionally connect with. Micah Sarnoski takes a genuine creative risk. He removes almost every comforting quality associated with Robin Hood and refuses to replace the heroic legend with another easy fantasy. This Orwoban is not secretly noble. His suffering does not automatically make him worthy of sympathy, and his final good choices do not erase the people harmed by his earlier life. That moral honesty is the film's strongest quality. Hugh Jackman commits completely to the transformation. He makes Robin physically frightening, emotionally resistant, and gradually vulnerable without asking you to forget what the character has done. Jodie Comer brings intelligence and restraint to Brigid. Bill Skarsgård gives Little John a desperate, damaged loyalty. And Murray Bartlett creates unexpected gentleness through a performance largely hidden beneath bandages. The filmmaking is consistently impressive, but Scolas Texture's cinematography makes the landscape feel ancient, cold, and indifferent. The production design avoids decorative medieval fantasy. Tim Geddes' music and the detailed natural sound create an atmosphere that remains in your memory long after individual lines disappear. Yet atmosphere cannot replace emotional development. Brigid needs more space outside Robin's story. Little John's attempt to build another life deserves greater attention. Margaret's connection with Robin is touching, but sometimes functions more as proof of his transformation than as a fully developed relationship. The final revelations arrive so closely together that the movie reaches its intended meaning before every emotion has time to settle. The severe tone also becomes limiting. When nearly every scene carries maximum weight, the film loses contrast. More warmth at the Priory would have made its threatened peace more valuable. More ordinary humanity would have made the final sorrow sharper. Instead, the movie remains so determined to avoid sentimentality that it occasionally avoids failing. My personal rating is 5 out of 10. That score does not mean the film lacks quality. It reflects the distance between its remarkable craft and its incomplete emotional effect. I can see the intelligence in the structure, respect the refusal of a conventional climax, and appreciate the performances, while still feeling that the finished experience never becomes as powerful as its ideas promise. You should watch this if you enjoy slow medieval dramas, morally compromised protagonists, revisionist folklore, textured cinematography, and stories about guilt that refuse easy forgiveness. It will especially reward you if you value atmosphere, symbolic details, restrained performances, and endings that become clearer through reflection. You may not connect with it if you want an adventurous Robin Hood, frequent action, humor, romance, a sympathetic hero, or a strongly emotional redemption story. The opening promises an intensity they later feel intentionally abandons. Impatient conversations and long silences test your attention. The Prairie section may feel far longer than its actual runtime. For most people, streaming is the best way to watch it. The quieter setting allows you to approach the film as a chamber drama without the expectation of a large theatrical adventure. A cinema screen still benefits the landscape, 35mm texture, and carefully layered sound, so serious visual film enthusiasts may prefer that experience. Owning it makes sense mainly for Sarnoski admirers, Jackman collectors, or anyone who expects the film to improve through repeated viewing. The death of Robin Hood does not give the outlaw the death his legend would demand. It gives him the ending his life has earned, small, unresolved, and controlled by people whose stories once disappeared beneath his own. The hero dies first. The man only becomes visible afterward. Every film is a box, and we opened this one together. Thank you for staying with me through every compartment of the death of Robin Hood. This was not an easy film to open. Its images are beautiful, its ideas are severe, and its final judgment refuses to arrive in a comfortable form. If this breakdown helped you see the arrow, the blood, the hidden names, and the quiet ending differently, support the film box by liking the video and subscribing. It genuinely helps us keep opening difficult films with the time and attention they deserve. Now I want to hear your verdict. Can Robin's decision to stop the cycle give his final days meaning? Or does the film ask Brigid and Margaret to carry too much of the emotional cost for his redemption? Tell me where you stand in the comments. Do not give me the polite answer. Tell me whether the ending moved you, frustrated you, or left you somewhere between mercy and judgment. Whatever your answer is, remember what this film leaves behind. A legend can inspire people while concealing the person who created it. A guilty man can change without becoming innocent. Forgiveness can be offered, refused, or left unresolved. And sometimes the most meaningful final act is not defeating another enemy. It is making sure no one else inherits the fight. Thank you for watching, thinking, and opening the box with me. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the film box. See you in the next one.